And when we say leadership support, that often means support from the CEO.
Ultimately, every business model is like yogurt. At some point, they expire.
You could fear that fear prevents action.
Without action, there's not going to be any change.
The ability to radically change the organization will never be there if we don't create that strong connection with an intent, with a vision, with an ambition at the highest level of the organization.
They can delegate managing the change, but I think that initial reason for change and setting the emotional tone needs to come from the CEO.
The right question was why? Why should we innovate? What do we think about the future? There's always an element of human interaction that you cannot completely model, predict, and control.
All right. Good morning, good day, good evening, everyone. This is our first Agile Insights conversation from 2023. Today, I'm being joined by Frederic Etiemble. Most people call him just Fred or know him under the name Fred. Fred is one of the co-authors of this wonderful book, The Invincible Company, together with Alex Osterwalder, Steve Pineur, and Alan Smith. He wrote this book, I think it was in 2020 it was released, Fred?
Correct.
During the COVID pandemic, there were supposed to be launch parties, but then COVID hit. Still, I think the book did pretty well. I'm super excited to have you with us today. Today's conversation topic mainly is going to be around the topic of change and what role emotions play in change. But before we go into that topic, Fred, I want to give you the stage, the time to introduce yourself, because many of our viewers probably have not met you before, have not seen you before. And it would be interesting for them to know where all of this experience comes from so that they can also put the stuff that you and I discuss later into specific context. So this is your stage. Give us a brief introduction about yourself, Fred.
Thanks, Sohrab. So my name is Frederic Etiemble. Originally I'm from France, but I've been living in Australia, in Melbourne. I've been calling Melbourne home for the last 10 years now. And my work is really focused around innovation, corporate innovation and strategy today. But if I reflect back on where I started and the thin red line of everything I've done in my professional career, it's always been about helping organizations manage large change. And started my career in France, and then I had the opportunity to work in different countries. I actually spent 7 years in Switzerland, living 10 minutes away from where my co-authors, Alex Osterwalder and Yves Pineur, were living, but I have never met them at that time. And then I moved to Australia in 2012, and then 2014 I heard about their work, started to deep dive into the tools they had created, for instance, the business model canvas, using those tools with my clients, and then ending up meeting them in 2016. Started working with them as I was using more and more the innovation toolkit, innovation methodologies in my client work. And we did some work together, worked on innovation, creating innovation metrics, for instance, the new type of metrics that should be used to assess innovation projects and not typical metrics that are used. And ended up working with them, as you mentioned, in 2018, writing the Invincible Company. So I was bringing some of my experience working with organizations on large change, adding that to some of the case studies that we presented in the book. As you said, took a couple of years to write that book. It's probably one of the hardest projects I've done. Anyone who's written a book knows how hard it is. You don't think so when you start, but it's actually so intense. And the official release date was, as you said, April 2020. So fantastic time to be launching a book just 1 month after COVID became that global pandemic. But it didn't stop us from using this book as a platform to do more work around corporate innovation, helping leaders use the ideas of this book to create new growth engines, but also to create like long-term resilience in their organization. The ability to withstand shocks like COVID or other types of shocks, and still survive and thrive. So that's the kind of work I do today.
Yeah, cool. This is super interesting. I remember when you and I had our conversation prior to this recorded one. I was so fascinated with the move that you made from Europe to Australia, because it was not like you being just by yourself as a young man going there, exploring stuff. You took your whole family on this very uncertain journey, and it fortunately worked out well for you, and you've like settled there. Now, you mentioned that for the past decades, basically in plural, you have been working on managing large change in organization, and mostly, and this was, I think, part of the last things that you mentioned in your introduction, it was mostly about building in resilience, bringing back that innovative edge that many companies, especially many large and older companies, have lost over the years. Now, let's dive into this topic, because I particularly find this interesting, and I had several conversations around this topic with Alex as well, where one of them fairly recently, the video is still in production, where we talked about, usually organizations are innovative and resilient as long as the founder is there, right? Doesn't matter if it's a male or female founder, but as long as the founder is there. And once that founder leaves, they might retire, they might pass, whatever, right? Over time, these organizations become less and less innovative, and based on that, less and less resilient. But there are exceptions. In your book, you have covered the case study of Ping An. I don't know whether this was from you or Alex or collaborative you brought this in, where one of the co-CEOs being in charge of innovation is not the founder of the organization, but brings that innovative edge, that innovative fire with them. There are other organizations which can serve as role models. But I would like to get your perspective on this. What have been some of the most important ones? And let's stay on the high level first before we then deep dive. What have been some of the most important high level characteristics or ingredients to make these large change initiatives, which always include also cultural change, successful?
Yeah, and as you said, when we were preparing for this talk, I was reflecting on the one recent example with a client of mine that was in the banking area, and we were reflecting on why what are the main drivers to conduct large change programs in an industry like banking. And you mentioned Ping Han, which started, let's say it's the financial services area. But there's another example purely in banking with the bank from Singapore called DBS. And when the new CEO of DBS came, now it's 15 years ago, he had this fear of disruption, like this gut feel, like deep down that, banking was about bits and bytes, as he said. And if one industry was going to be disrupted by technology, it would be banking, not only entertainment and journalism, etc., but banking. So he drove a program of change from that energy that was created by this fear. And that I found quite fascinating. And then, as I was researching, why some banks are conducting large programs of change, I saw something on the completely opposite end of the spectrum. I looked into another bank in Russia called Sberbank, which, by the way, you probably have heard of as well, because they're very, very vocal about being an agile bank and having hundreds of thousands of agile employees, etc. but back to the change topic. In 2020, the CEO of Sberbank announced that they would launch a program of change to become a tech company. So something similar to DBS. But in their case, it was not out of fear. It was out of, you could call it desire or hunger, a sense of opportunity. Basically, what the CEO was saying was, in Russia, people, they're going to have the same needs as in other parts of the world. They will want their shopping delivered at home. They will want entertainment. They will want the ability to order a cab or mobile transport in an easy way. And we can either let the US companies or the Chinese tech giants take this market, or we can build it ourselves. And we're going to build it ourselves. So same thing, the action, the drive for action coming from a very, very strong emotion, in that case, hunger or desire. But in both cases, whether it's fear or this hunger, what fascinated me was that there was something that was really powerful. And you needed that on top of the rational argument to get those large organizations into action. And often when I'm faced with situations where large programs of change don't get in motion, it's because this powerful emotion is not there or is not strong enough. And here I'm talking about program of change that would be centered around corporate innovation, but you could probably experience the same thing around large agile transformations, etc. You might have seen something similar in your own practice.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, for me, all of those agile transformation ultimately should have the purpose of bringing back the innovative edge, because just changing the way we work doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's all about achieving certain outcomes. And that outcome for me is helping an organization or within an organization build up the capability to become, again, more innovative, create new business models and sustain the organization over many, many decades to come as their current. And I love this quote from Alex. Ultimately, every business model is like yogurt. At some point, they expire, right? Some take longer because it's a strong business model or they're protected or whatever. But at some point, they will expire. Even banking will expire, as the CEO of DBS mentioned, based on what you were saying. So becoming again or getting into shape and being able to create new sustaining business models, that's, I think, the intention of every transformation. I fully agree with you that emotional piece is super important. When you and I were talking, I remember the book I read many years ago from Andy Grove called Only the Paranoid Survives. Now, when I read that book, I did not necessarily connect it to the topic of change and emotions, but during our conversation, this whole book came back to me. And I was thinking back then, and it has stuck with me for the past few weeks, and I kept it until today's conversation. In this book, Andy Grove, being paranoid in most cases sounds very negative, right? You mentioned the CEO of DBS out of that fear, which again is a negative emotion. Does it always have to be such a negative, such a, let's say, life-threatening for an organization, not for the individual, situation where you create that desire, where you create that necessary also alignment and then speed in order to move into action? Because, I mean, without action, there's not going to be any change. We can put as many things on posters as we want. It is ultimately the actions that determine that there is change. Or can it also be positive emotions of hope, of whatever? Now, in the case of Sberbank, and I love the fact that you brought this up, again, hunger and desire, I don't know where to place them, but maybe you have a few other examples, or even within these two examples, you have observed different emotions in different stages of this change as well.
Yeah, and yeah, I find it fascinating. You're talking about negative emotion and I agree. I would associate fear with a negative emotion, and you could fear that fear prevents action. But what was surprising is to see it as a source of energy for change. In the case of Sberbank, the hunger. There's something. I don't know if it's so much more positive. This hunger. There's an aspect of greed into it that is not exactly only roses and daisies. I would think that large change programs can also be centered around the willingness to create a more human workplace or a more human, um, more human interactions, or an environment where people can bring their whole selves to work, etc. But it's not as acceptable, I think, as you are probably talking to your investors and trying to convince the key stakeholders in your organization, as it was, in the case of DBS. The story was pretty clear. In the case of Sberbank, the story is pretty clear as well. It includes that emotion. It leads into action, but it's still the story that makes sense to investors and key stakeholders. Maybe the link between other types of emotions and the ability to use them to create other types of change programs, we're not completely ready yet. I remember that a few years ago I had written an article around Agile and using Agile as a Trojan horse for bottom-up business transformation. You're changing the relationships inside organizations and hoping that this could be like something that creates a completely different organization, and then move its way up the hierarchy all the way to the top. But I've never really seen that happening in real life.
Same
Um,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, I think this is something that a lot of people idealize. Like they would love to see this, but similar to you, I have never seen this happen in real life. Now, this brings me back to those topics, to the topic of emotions. Um, I agree with you. I mean, even in the case of Sparebank, the hunger, the desire could be some kind of fear as well. You mentioned like they understood pretty quickly that people in Russia are not going to be any different from people in other places of the world, especially as they travel. They would have or build that desire of ordering food online, etc. And now they can leave this market to others, or they can
yeah,
decide to participate in that market themselves. And if they leave it to other, again, there is this fear those companies will ultimately go beyond their industry boundaries into new fields. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to the CEO of a mid-sized insurance company, around 5,000 people. Not that big, but also not that small.
mm,
And it was all about bringing in more agility into that organization. And the CEO said, you know what? We are currently so successful, we really don't need to change anything. And I said, what needs to happen for you to reconsider this statement? And he immediately said, the moment Amazon goes into insurance, we're fucked. Sorry for that
mm,
word, but that's what he said. I'm like, why? He's like, because I know they are so agile and they're so
mm,
fast, they're going to eat us before we can even like decide in which direction to run. And then I asked him, so don't you think you would have to prepare for that right now? He's like, honestly, I don't see them going into insurance.
mm,
A year
mm,
later, I read an article that Amazon had bought a small insurance company in the UK to make their entry into Europe, into the European insurance market. I
Yeah.
forwarded this article to him. I was like, your nightmare just became true. And he's like, oh man, now we need help. He still took it with a bit of laughter and smiling, right? But I think again, in that case, it would have been, or it was ultimately the fear that made him reconsider and change or try to change the organization. Now, what I would be interested in, you mentioned this bottom up movements not working based on your observation, also based on my observation. When we get to now bottom up not moving, usually it becomes something that is top down, maybe a mix of both, but I think it
Mhm.
usually starts at the top. And my observation, and maybe you can second that, maybe you have a different opinion on that, is that these emotions, these desire for change, they need to be set by the CEO and by the whole executive team. I don't think that this is something that a CEO, no matter how large or small the organization is, in small organizations, even more important. But I don't even think in large organizations, this is something that the CEO can delegate to someone
Mhm.
else. They can delegate managing the change, but I think that initial reason for change and setting the emotional tone needs to come from the CEO. What is your perspective on this, Fred?
Yeah, I fully agree. And earlier on, you were mentioning, the importance of the founders. So in companies where founder is still there. So typically there is the aura around the founder, and there's also the ability to drive change because of you know the power of the founder. Maybe he's still the main stockholder in the organization, in the company. Now, in large organizations that are way past that stage where the founder is no longer involved, but you have a CEO. The CEO needs to needs to have that vision, and needs to create that energy, creates that vision of where the organization should go. Now, when we work in building an innovation capability inside an organization, as a way to explore potential new growth engines, as a way to de-risk certain areas of the business that might be at risk of disruption in the short or mid-term, as a way to build that long-term resilience by exploring multiple ideas, multiple avenues of change. Now we know that we need leadership support, and when we say leadership support, that often means support from the CEO. So I know that maybe a few years ago, when innovation was still a black box, we could only focus on the how, and that was enough. We could really come and talk about how innovation works and the mechanics of creating an innovation capability, etc. Now I know this will not be enough, without the CEO support, and without this innovation capability being at the service of that vision, of that change, of that intention, of that ambition. If that ambition, that vision is not there, we're just creating a capability that would just hum a little bit, create a little bit of energy around new ways of working, etc. But the ability to radically change the organization will never be there if we don't create that strong connection with an intent, with a vision, with an ambition at the highest level of the organization. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you brought up a new term in our conversation, which is the vision or the ambition. would for you, and this is part of the things that Cotter mentions in terms of change, like the number one thing you have to set out is the purpose for change, or declaring what the why is. Is that for you the same thing as the emotion?
No, so and again, which it's funny because this conversation goes into if I come back to the how of innovation, like the building the capability for innovation. I mean, this is what I do every day. So this is what my colleagues do every day. This is what you know. Strategizer does, what Alex does, etc. So we know a lot about those areas. Now we are going into areas that are a lot more murky, a lot more complicated to talk about. So our conversation feels a bit more hesitant. If we were talking about, this is what you need to do to build an innovation capability, this would be tack, straight to the point. But here it's based on the human beings and their aspirations for life and their worldviews, and how do you change that? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I can work with every organization or with every leader. There's always an element of of how people gel together, how people work together. There's always an element of human interaction that is not completely, that you cannot completely model, predict, and control. But that's also what makes it fascinating. Yeah. So we know how to build I can tell my clients is that I know how to build a capability for innovation. So tomorrow you're in insurance. Tomorrow you want to become the best online golf lessons company. We could explore that. I know how to build an innovation capability for you to explore if there's a market there. But why would you do that? Why does that put sparkles in your eyes and warmth in your body to think about becoming an online golf courses company? I don't know. I'm just
coming up with ideas.
Random ideas. But this is where I remember a project we did with a very large organization, tens and tens of thousands of employees, and we came up with a blueprint for an innovation capability, because that's what the job was. That's what was asked to us. This is what they thought they needed to know. And then, when the mission was complete and we went through the blueprint, nothing happened. Nothing happened for them, because how we can do innovation was not the right question in their context. The right question was why. Why should we innovate? What do we think about the future? Are we fearful about the future? Are we excited? Are we neutral? Do we think that the party that we've been enjoying the last 10 years, like this business model we've built a fortune out of, do we think it will still be there in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? As Alex says, is how far in the future is the expiry date of this business model? And this is what you need to explore with them, because if you're talking with a leadership team and one of them thinks that the business is at risk of disruption within 2 years, then you have an ally in the room, because an innovation capability is a great way. It's like an insurance policy. It's a great way to minimize that risk of disruption. But if the next colleague thinks that the business is safe for the next 10 years because maybe you're protected by EU regulations that will make it very difficult for any disruptor to enter your industry, then why would you waste your time, your money, your energy in an innovation capability that you don't need because you're safe for the next 10 years. So there's no, the question of how is important, but is not enough. You also need to explore the why and to explore the worldviews, the assumptions that people are making. So it's funny because this is exactly what we teach innovation teams. What assumptions are you making? What experiment are you going to run to test that assumption? And what decision are you going to make based on what you learned from the experiment? So now we're doing something similar at the leadership level around the assumptions they're making about the future and the solidity of their business model in the future, and what needs to be true in the future for this to be the right leadership approach or the right investment or resource allocation for the next year or the next 2 years. So those are fascinating conversations. And go for it.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, and that's where I have to find that, I need to find that balance between something that is super rational, that is embedded in the scientific approach. Let's surface as our assumption, run experiments, bring the data, but let's also use the energy that is released by those conversations, because as we discussed in the early part of our conversation, sometimes fear is a driver for change. Sometimes hunger is a driver for change. And we also need to use that, because we also know that contrary, to a startup where this is all they do, in a large organization, we'll have to fight against the status quo and the power of the existing business models that are in place. And even if they are struggling, they're still super powerful. And changing that requires releasing immense energy, so that those emotions can help us bring together that energy for change.
Yeah, no, and that I fully agree with. Going beyond the how, thinking about the why, definitely important. Now, I think you can think about the why and also articulate the why without a lot of emotions. And that's what I see a lot of organizations doing, like talking about, okay, what is the reason for change? We want to become the number one automotive company in the world. Okay, what is the emotion there, right?
Yeah.
There's a why, right? But the emotion is not there. And I think this emotional piece that you brought up in our conversation, that thought hasn't left me since, is extremely important, because ultimately, and as you were saying, changing an organization, however big or small, is about mobilizing people. And I compare this to what I see happening around the world. My own family originally comes from Iran. The reason we live in Germany is because my parents were politically active, right? Like a lot of the young men and women right now doing the same thing in Iran, but also in many other countries. They are not driven by a rational why. They're driven by an emotional why. And I think this emotion, or in general emotions, don't play that big of a role in many organizations. If I look at, for example, the automotive industry, which I've been following, I'm in Germany, so automotive industry is all over the place, right? And many of them have been my clients. Throughout the past decade, right, when even Tesla was super small, I never saw any big emotions in these companies in terms of, they were continuously producing new cars, like incremental improvements on those cars, a bit more efficient, a bit bigger, more comfortable, all of that. But there was not a lot of emotion. They put a lot of emotion into advertising their cars to their end consumers, but not a lot of emotions internally. And I think this is also one of the reasons why many of them don't manage to change fast enough, right? Because the emotion is lacking. And the emotion can, I think, be on many levels. One of the levels where you can build emotion is we need to protect this planet, right? We need to provide, we need to become part of the solution, not part of the problem of saving humanity.
Yeah.
Because the planet is going to be fine, we're not going to be fine. That's one thing. Another emotion could be we want to do anything in our power to continue providing for the people that work in this company, that have made this company successful. I think that's a very strong emotion also in order to increase more collaboration and team thinking. But I don't see any, I see them now thinking, okay, we need to beat Tesla. But for me, this does not necessarily result in big emotions. It could result in a bit of fear, right? And competitiveness. That could also be some kind of emotion. But the big existential threats that the CEO of DBS was talking about, or what we see in political movements, I think that emotion is missing in most change initiatives. And I wonder how we can raise the awareness for top executives, ultimately the CEO, to start talking about these emotions more as a way of mobilizing hundreds, thousands, if not 100,000s of people to go along with that change. Because what we also know is that change in itself is difficult, right? I mean, it means not only one person changing their habits, the way they approach work on a day-to-day basis, but that a lot of people change their habits and that we collectively change how we interact, how we work, how we engage with customers, how we build products, how we like control each other. All of those things, they need to change. And that's tough. So we need a very strong push in this case, a very strong emotion that helps us go through this. And maybe over time, we've all seen this J curve for the change journey. The emotions also change. It could start out with fear. I don't think it has to start with fear, but it can. And over time, hopefully, it turns more towards hope because we already see the results that we're achieving. But what is your perspective on this thing?
Yeah, I mean, well, I love what you just said. It brings, I mean, there are two ideas that come to my mind. First, a short story that, one executive that, one client executive here in Melbourne was telling me the story of how the sustainability agenda started in her company. She was an executive there, a big manufacturing company, very well known here in Australia. And the first time someone, not top level executive, but more middle manager in the ranks, rising up, trying to bring the sustainability topic to the senior executives, it was received always as shareholder value first, like a very old playbook with executives that were feeling that their number one responsibility was, creating shareholder value, not going into unknown territories or spending money and driving costs up with sustainability programs, etc. Until someone said, but we are execs here to create shareholder value, but we're also citizens, we're also fathers and family members. We're also, and suddenly the emotion was rising and the perspective was changing and the perspective was getting wider and wider. And she said until it reached a tipping point, and then they had a sustainability agenda where suddenly they started to be at the forefront of what was happening in the sustainability area here in Australia. And I think there's a lot of this happening. It's pushing from everywhere on that topic of sustainability, and there are more and more cracks in the old postures, and this old playbook is starting to look a bit old, and more and more executives are going to bring their whole self and bring all their values to the table as well in in their executive role as well and bring that perspective. But it's hard, I'm not judging anyone else, but even when I look at myself, I'm very passionate about sustainability, but sometimes I find it hard to be very upfront. I also try to find a way to bring the topic to the table, but I'm not always upfront with the topic. Sometimes I use innovation as a Trojan horse to say, okay, actually, sustainability could be a good topic to be, innovative and to have new growth drivers, because maybe your customers are very concerned about sustainability. They're very interested in sustainability. Maybe your employees are very interested as well, and that could also increase employee engagement and the loyalty to you as an employer, etc., etc. So, instead of saying you need to be more sustainable because this is the right thing to do, I'm a little bit cautious and I test the water. Is this a driver for growth? Is this a risk? Could this be a risk mitigation element? So I just want to say it's not always, in those business situations, it's not always easy to be upfront or to have this high moral statement around sustainability. But if the door is slightly open, I just enter there and say, okay, let's use all those techniques, this innovation toolkit, those methodologies, etc., to explore how we could move even faster in that direction, because we agree this might be the right thing to do. Does that make sense? So
it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I think, you look at this, or you were just describing your role as an external advisor, right? As a coach, as a consultant, working with organizations, and carefully also trying to bring in topics that you're passionate about. And I emphasize on the word carefully, because even if you're the CEO of an organization, you cannot just from one day to the other go and say, okay, now we're going to put all of our energy in here. You have to bring along a lot of people, your own executive team, but also the other people in the organization. And for most large organizations, you have to bring along the board of directors, right? Even if you are a majority shareholder or have controlling rights of the organization, you still have to bring along the shareholders, or in that case, the board of directors. And if you're publicly listed, you need to have a good story for the shareholders to tell. So, and there are a lot of people that have talked about this, like Paul Polman, former CEO of Unilever, right, where he described how he very transparently articulated his vision for the organization to shareholders and said, if you're focused on the next quarter, you're probably not going to be happy with us, but if you're focused on the next decade, we're gonna be a good investment for you. And that way, through this transparency, he also attracted the right investors into his company. Now, a very recent thing, maybe that we could talk about for a few moments. As someone interested in change within organizations, especially with the need to become more innovative and sustain, I've been observing Twitter, very, very interested in that topic. What is your perspective? How do you perceive that? Because, Elon Musk gets a lot of negative comments on how he is not only approaching the change, but in general, how he's changing that organization. What do you see as an outsider? What is your perspective with everything that we talked about, like the emotions and all of that? When you look at this example, both of us have limited information. I think that's important to also acknowledge. But with that limited information, how do you look at this, and where do you think this might be going as a very interesting and very public case study for change?
Yeah, it's funny because even though I've dedicated my career to innovation and to change, etc., my attitude towards things that happen like that is to take a bit of distance and to let the dust settle, to see exactly what happened, why it happened like that, etc. So I tend not to get involved into the hypes around blockchain or some of the NFTs or the latest thing happening at Twitter. I try to take a bit of distance and then try to understand it from that distance. So for me, it's still too early to judge what is happening there. What I find interesting there is that I think I see some of that in some organizations in Australia. I mean, this happens everywhere in the world. It looks like this is a visionary leader, Elon Musk. I mean, I'm always trying to reconcile those two data points. We always say you cannot predict the future, so you're going to use those experimentation methods in order to find your path. And then you read the memo from Elon Musk on how he's going to build Tesla, and you realize that he's just been implementing a plan that he had in his mind a decade ago, which is absolutely crazy given the amount of innovation that he's bringing to the world. And you look at the car, and you look at energy production, energy storage, and now you look at the moment where there will be enough cars to actually move that energy, and what it starts to look like is a moving energy infrastructure. And you can trade that energy. And this is crazy. I mean, the directions in which it could go and how it could change one sector, energy. So I'm very interested about that. But what I also see is that, there's a dark side to that person. Is a visionary, is highly intelligent, but it looks like, from an emotional perspective, there might be something missing. And will people follow him all the way is what I'm wondering when I see some of those things that we read, because there seems to be something missing from the emotional perspective. And I think in the future, we will want to have more leaders that bring a very human workplace, that bring a very that enable people to bring their whole self to work. I think that's what people are longing. The people like you and I, who've been around in the end of the 90s, the last 20 years, basically, where there was some pretty dry working environments. I can count on one fingers, the projects I was in where there was an incredible connection within people, where there was incredible energy, where we felt, everything was possible and that we could deliver anything. But that's not the norm. That's more the exception when you look at a career, and most often you're like, oh, this is too hard. I'm just going to, people are like, this is too hard. I'm just going to do what I'm told. And they retract, they disengage, etc. And now I think we have an opportunity to change that and bring back the incredible creativity of people, their energy, and use that in the office. But it's going to require a different type of leaders. And I'm not sure, to come back to your question, if Elon Musk is one of those. On one hand, he is, because he's doing something incredible, like building a completely different energy sector. But on the other hand, he seems to be a bit lacking some emotional skills as well. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I also think that looking at these things, one needs to have a bit of distance, not only geographically, but also in terms of time. And I really like the work that Jim Collins does. He never refers to himself as a management guru. He always says he's a historian, because he looks at things from like 10, 15, 20 years ago, and then he tries to identify patterns. And I think it is too early to make any assessment or judgment, especially. I mean, you could do an assessment, but not a judgment on what's happening at Twitter. And what I try to do I teach a lot of leadership courses, and then people ask me, right, what is your thought on Elon Musk? I'm like, yeah, on the one hand, as you mentioned, I look at his achievements and not only building Tesla, but transitioning the whole industry. And I've done a lot of work in automotive. 6 years ago, people were laughing at me when I drove with my Tesla to Volkswagen or other companies. I mean, look who's laughing now, right? And so transitioning that whole industry is incredible. And it's not only one. I mean, even if we don't count his very first startup, Zip2, I think, then we had PayPal, then we have Tesla, then we have SpaceX. I have one of those SpaceX satellite systems here, satellite internet. It's amazing. I mean, it's incredible what that system can do and how it can help humanity, and especially those areas and those people in the world that don't have access to a regular grid and all of that. I mean, they would only need a SpaceX satellite plus a bit of electricity. And I mean, worst thing, you jump on a bike and you pedal, and then you have electricity, and then you have internet. So all of that is amazing. And I think he obviously didn't build these things by himself. So he managed to mobilize, and this is again going to the topic of change and emotions. He managed to mobilize a ton of extremely smart and ambitious people to work with him on these missions. And I was noticing the past few days and weeks when there was a lot of this, right now, ChatGPT is so great. Guess who's behind OpenAI? It's again this guy, together with other people. But there again, he managed to mobilize extremely good people, including Sam, I always forget Sam Altman, who used to let Y Combinator, and then he let that go and joined Elon Musk in building and ultimately being the CEO of OpenAI. So I don't think that everything he's doing at Twitter is definitely wrong just because a lot of people perceive it as wrong. And I can imagine, again, looking into the future, and then it might be interesting to look back at this, that this mass layoffs and all of that can again result in very strong emotions. Do those emotions need to be positive? Going back to the very beginning of our conversation, I don't think so. It could really be about creating that emotion of fear, which in the long run is not healthy. I mean, I'm a medical doctor. I know that you don't want to live with constant fear. It just creates too much stress. But in some situations, it might be needed to make a very big change happen.
Yeah.
And probably judging as a consumer, I think Twitter has not been the most innovative company in the past 15, 20 years. So there might be a big change needed. Again, I'm not close enough to make that rational assessment or judgment. But yeah, I agree with you. Let the dust settle, and then we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
But it's interesting because, I mean, you and I were not experts on emotions. I mean, there are people who are researching those topics, etc. But maybe emotion is not the right term. But what you describe, like, is someone who makes the impossible possible. And I guess when you get into an environment where something like that, making the impossible possible, that creates something. I don't know if it's an emotion, but there's a wow, wow, I'm in a place where we can actually build those crazy things. And I think that creates energy, that creates emotion. I'm going to use the term emotion. But I don't think that emotion, or I don't think those people would lose anything if the leader was a very nice human person on top. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be a tyrant or and I think some leaders like that are emerging as well, who create an environment where the impossible becomes possible, but where human values. You were talking about protecting the planet, or having more ownership for the community responsibilities, and an organization is a community taking ownership for this aspect as well. they're much better at this than the leaders we've seen in the last 2 years.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you on that. Fred, it's been super interesting. I enjoyed this conversation. Time flew. We're at the end of our time box. I want to A, thank you, and B, is there anything else you would want to share with our audience? Also, probably how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in maybe working with you at some point.
Sure. Yeah. The easiest is to connect on LinkedIn and start a conversation there. That's really easy. So you can find me Frederic Etiemble on LinkedIn, and that's probably the easiest. And for me as well, it's been an incredible conversation. Very in the spirit of experimentation, innovation. We went into a territory where none of us are experts, but we had good fun exploring those areas that are at the margin of what we do, of the change we need, but that are not completely mastered yet. And I think it's going to be an area where I keep looking, because one of the things that, as I enter this new part of my career, one of the things that is becoming important is not only the outcome that I can deliver to customers, but also having those experiences, vibrant experiences of working together as well. I think this is, I realized recently, during the COVID years, that this is one of the most important parts of my job as well. I want to be in those vibrant experience of bringing change to organizations. So that's, I want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. And as we were talking about, you can count the number of projects where there was this energy and all of this. On one hand, I was thinking, yeah, it is that case. And it's very sad that it's like this. So I'm sure our path will cross again, and maybe we can work on this particular topic that you and I are both emotionally involved in to finally use the term again and make an impact. Thank you, Fred, for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.